have an active shooter.
Let's go ahead and declare this a mass casualty.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired at 4:15 ASL. Route 91 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Tragedy in Bend after a shooting spree at a shopping center. Just after 7 o'clock last night, a gunman opened fire at the Forum Shopping Center, killing 2 people at a Safeway grocery store and injuring 2 others.
Police say this shooting spree lasted only a matter of minutes, but being on the ground here in Bend tonight, you can see the impact on this community will last a long while. Now, we are learning the identities of the 2 victims killed in this shooting. They are 85-year-old Glenn Edward Bennett, a customer at Safeway, and a 66-year-old Safeway employee named Donald Surratt Jr. The common themes we seem to hear over and over again when covering mass shooting cases are statements such as, they seemed like someone who would commit a shooting. Their mental health took a serious decline recently. They suddenly became paranoid, or they suddenly became extreme. And, of course, most commonly, the guns were purchased legally. Indeed, most of those themes will appear throughout the case we are covering today. The shooter was clearly suffering from some sort of mental health crisis, and had been for some time. He was violent and liked to pick fights starting at an early age. The shooter displayed so many of the obvious traits that we've come to associate with active shooters. So why was he able to access firearms? And why was he able to carry out such a deadly act when others foresaw him doing that very thing? Why, if mass shooters are so much easier to identify, are we still no better off today than decades ago? The questions I just asked will not be answered in today's episode, but they are topics we should all be discussing and making real efforts to resolve. Today's case is dedicated to the lives and memories of the 2 injured survivors and the 2 deceased victims, Donald Ray Surratt Jr. and Glenn Edward Bennett. Active Shooter the Podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter Podcast team has taken the No Notoriety Pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name. We will refer to today's shooter as Ben. Sunday, August 28th, 2022 was a hot, sunny summer day in Bend, Oregon. Bend, with an average of 300 sunny days each year, it's not atypical for a summer day to be clear and bright from sunup to sundown. Bend, Oregon is an eclectic city located about 160 miles southeast of Portland. The city boasts a population of 103,000 full-time residents and is loaded with things to do, including camping, cycling, guided tours, and brewery tours, just to name a few. The Deschutes River runs through the heart of the city, which sits along the boundary of the eastern Cascades slopes and foothills. It's breathtakingly beautiful and serene, which presents a horrifically stark contrast to the forbidding tragedy that was to unfold in this charming Pacific Northwest city.
a loss that this community was not prepared for. At 7 p.m. Sunday evening, 20-year-old Ben exited his apartment located at the Fox Hollow apartment building. He carried a .556 NATO Radical Firearms RF-15 semi-automatic rifle and a 12-gauge Stevens Model 320 pump-action shotgun as he walked towards his truck. Rather than getting inside to drive away, Ben shot at the 1997 Ford F-150 before turning back to walk through the parking lot towards the Forum Shopping Center, located in front of the apartment complex and parking lot. As he approached the Costco, Ben fired into the store's parking lot. The sight of Ben likely presented a sinister image, as he walked with a swift gait through, carrying firearms and wearing a black t-shirt with the word "hurt" in big, bold letters stretched across the front. He also wore black pants, a tactical vest, and a green satchel filled with ammunition, which was slung around his waist. Four minutes after leaving his apartment, Ben entered the parking lot of the Forum Shopping Center from the rear alley of the shopping center that bordered the apartment complex. There were a number of stores located within the shopping center, including retail giants such as Old Navy, Big Lots, and Barnes & Noble, and major grocery stores such as Whole Foods and Safeway. As he walked through the parking lot, Ben shot into the Big Lots store that sat just next to the Safeway. He also turned and shot into the parking lot at a parked van. There was a stack of hot tubs sitting outside of a store, which Ben shot at, along with a Honda Civic that was slowly driving past. He fired with abandon and didn't appear to have any specific target in mind. He simply wanted to kill, and it didn't seem to matter who was in the line of fire. The Honda Civic's owner was cruising along, minding their own business, when a man dressed in black suddenly started shooting at them. Glass from the windshield shattered into the moving vehicle, and the driver was stuck with both the falling glass and pieces of shrapnel from bullets piercing through the passenger side door, as was later evidenced by bullet holes that riddled the door and windshield. Police later indicated that if there had been anyone in the passenger seat, they surely would not have survived the shooting. Ben approached the west entrance of the Safeway and encountered customer Glenn Bennett. Ben started shooting at Glenn and several other customers who were able to flee from the scene. Glenn wasn't as fortunate. He was shot and fell to the ground.
I was in Safeway with my 4 children, and my wife was in the car. She wasn't feeling well, so she was sitting out front in the car. And we were walking toward the front of the store, and I heard what I'm guessing is 6-7 shots going off outside the store. And I just turned to my kids. I knew what it was right away. I said,
a few of the customers turned back to try to assist Glenn, who was shot in his right arm, left thigh, and groin. He was rushed to the hospital and later succumbed to many injuries. 84-year-old Glenn Edward Bennett was born on September 8, 1937, in Gillette, Wyoming. He proudly served his country, fighting in Korea. Though he was a soldier, Glenn was known as a compassionate man who left a lasting impact on most that he met. He had lived in Bend, Oregon for 28 years leading up to death, and was incredibly passionate about old cars and was described as a huge movie buff. Ben proceeded into the store, shouting loudly, "You better run!" He stalked the aisleways, shooting down each as he wandered the store from one end to the other. The sight of a man walking anywhere with a firearm drawn is enough to cause panic and alarm, so the paralyzing sight of Ben must have been downright spine-chilling, as he carried the rifle in one hand and the shotgun in the other, shooting with complete abandon. Ben fired into the glass cases in the meat department and ambled along toward the produce section. Shoppers ran for their lives. Some hid behind anything large enough to conceal their form, while others gathered their courage and strength to fight back. One such patron, Molly, was shopping with her husband when they heard the shooting. Molly drew her own handgun from her purse, while her husband ran out the front door to retrieve his own firearm from their car. People were screaming. some the blood-curdling screams of one who is suffering from a great deal of pain or fear, while others were yelling to run and active shooter. When Ben finally made his way to the produce section, a Safeway employee named Donald was also ready to fight back. He was either going to stop the shooter, or he was going to die trying. Donald did both. He grabbed a produce knife, clutching the green handle as he stealthily stepped just behind a produce cart. As Ben approached and peered away from Donald, Donald sprang into action, stabbing Ben while simultaneously trying to disarm him. Unfortunately, Ben managed to gain control of his weapons and shot and killed Donald.
Surratt engaged with the shooter, attempted to disarm him, and may very well have prevented further deaths. Mr. Surratt acted heroically during this terrible incident.
66-year-old Donald Don Ray Surratt Jr. died a hero. His actions very likely saved many other lives, and most certainly stalled the shooter as first responders raced to the scene. The 20-year-old Army vet was born on December 16, 1955, and had served as a combat engineer. Although Don wasn't deployed into an active combat zone, he was stationed in Germany 3 separate times and lived on various military bases across the United States. Don worked in the Visitor Information and Interpretive Services and Operations and Maintenance Divisions for the United States Forest Services. He worked in the Bend Fort Rock Ranger District for the Forest Services over 6 different seasons from 2012 to 2017. Don was described as big-hearted and a devoted husband to wife Jacqueline. He was an active member of the Lapine Seventh-day Adventist Church, as well as the Disabled American Vets, Chapter 14, Adjutant and Treasurer. Don is survived by 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. A GoFundMe was established in his honor, and it raised nearly $130,000, which is a testament to how many lives Don touched. At 7:08 p.m., only minutes after Ben initially shot into his own truck, Ben leaned back against the same product cart that Don hid behind moments earlier. He drew the shotgun up towards his lap, and he completed suicide. Police were already on the scene by that point and entered the store both through the front and rear entrances. A Bend police officer made his way to the produce department where he saw Ben sitting on the ground. Blood was quickly pooling around him, and it was evident that he was deceased. The officer withdrew the firearm from Ben's lap. Ben's hand was draped over the weapon, and both were drenched in blood. The officer moved the gun to safety as a precaution, and then returned to his fellow officers to assist in clearing the scene. Not a single Bend police officer fired a shot. This is specifically mentioned to give context to the massive amount of shots that Ben fired. It was over 100 rounds in all, between his own truck, the parking lots, the big lots, and of course, the Safeway. The entire shooting lasted 8 minutes, making it an average of 12.5 bullets fired per minute. Police continued to clear the Safeway, locating people hiding in the restrooms and store cooler, and escorted the shaken customers and employees from the store. A search of Ben's apartment and truck produced a sawed-off shotgun and 3 Molotov cocktails. Out of an abundance of caution, the bomb squad was called in to search the apartment and the Safeway, both of which were deemed clear. Subsequent investigation determined that Ben was previously employed by the Safeway grocery store. Ben's mother was a Safeway employee, working, according to her Facebook profile, as a, quote, personnel coordinator. What isn't clear is whether they were employed there at the same time, or, more importantly, the significance of the Safeway store, or why it was chosen as the shooting site. Ben purchased the ammunition a day prior to the shooting, and there were several boxes of ammo located back in Ben's apartment, along with the boxes for the firearms used in the shooting, purchased legally, and several cell phones. Search warrants were obtained for all electronic devices, and police collected nearly 175 pieces of evidence, 90 video clips, and several sets of photographs. Investigators interviewed over 80 people while surveillance was obtained from as many local businesses as possible. There was surveillance video from the Big Lots which depicts multiple shoppers clearly running for safety, while others were standing by the windows pointing into the parking lot. Seconds later, those same people in front of the window could be seen turning and running as the glass from the window exploded into millions of tiny shards that fell to the floor. Initially, there were reports of 2 shooters, though it was promptly determined that Ben acted alone. Ben was born on October 31st, 2001. He graduated from Mountain View High School in 2020. His high school years were fraught with anxiety and anger. He often got into fights, although Ben would describe himself as one who suffered from isolation and loneliness, which was a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ben's initial plans were to attack his former high school on the first day of class. However, according to evidence police located later, Ben couldn't wait any longer. He needed to carry out his murder plan because, quote, "the rage has become uncontrollable." A former classmate claimed that Ben was extremely aggressive and didn't have many friends as a result. Another classmate claimed that, as a freshman, they were suspended for a week after fighting with Ben. The classmate thought that Ben always held a grudge after that, and in fact, during one encounter between the two after high school, Ben was working at the Safeway and was in the parking lot collecting shopping carts when he came across the classmate whom Ben instantly recognized. Ben approached and threatened the classmate, who knew enough to take the threat seriously. Yet another classmate, Akela Haverland, claimed that Ben wasn't well liked because of his attitude towards others, and further explained that he was mean and awkward, but it was how uncomfortable he made his female classmates feel that stuck with Akela the most. So many students described Ben as the kid who was most likely to turn into a school shooter. The signs were there and clear to almost anyone who took the time to look. Perhaps it's time that we really start listening when this becomes the mantra about a person. Ben was fascinated with MMA, or mixed martial arts, and he even trained at a local gym called Danzig MMA. The pandemic shuttered all gyms, and Ben never started back up when everything reopened. He had no criminal history and not even a record of any sort of contact with law enforcement. He most certainly was never on their radar. Perhaps the single most important, perhaps even the only insight into Ben's state of mind, or why the rage burned so deeply within him, came from his manifesto. The 56-page document detailed Ben's utter hatred of the government, the COVID lockdowns, women, technology, and many other rants. He described his desire to kill and harm, and the writing read like a diary that Ben appeared to have been keeping for about 2 months before the shooting. The manifesto shows a very clear decline in Ben's mental health, and he discussed his precise plans for a school shooting, Columbine style. Ben likened himself to an introvert who had anger issues, and he frequently talked about how dangerous he was. Most chillingly, Ben preemptively blamed family members for the shooting, claiming that they drove him to want to murder innocent people, though he never really seems to explain how they did so. There are several excerpts from Ben's manifesto that, while disturbing, bring you, our listeners, into the mind of pure evil. Some of these excerpts will be read here for you now. Regarding the COVID lockdowns, he said, quote, "I still haven't been able to pull myself out of that state. Despite numerous attempts at getting back into MMA, which I still love so dearly and always will, despite numerous jobs, despite numerous attempts at finding love once again, despite numerous attempts at being social and trying to make new friendships, they have all proved futile." The first page of the manifest reads in part, quote, "If you're reading this, then I'm definitely dead and have just committed a national tragedy. I've left this journal for all the investigators, media, internet sleuths, etc. But most importantly, this is for the very few people that I actually care about and want to understand why and how this happened, so that they can be at peace. I'm going to lay it all out for you. so that by the end of all of this, you will understand why I did what I did. What you'll see here is the documentation and description of the months, weeks, days, from today up until the massacre. And, he said, quote, this shooting is going to be a bit different. I'm not like the typical mass shooter. I'm different. I'm not doing this for fame or to get revenge. I simply want to die and leave a lasting impression and violent mark on this world on my way out. My life could have been different, but because of the mistakes and choices I've made, it led me here. I'm not exactly upset with it, though. I will find peace on the other side. A week before the shooting, Ben wrote the following, quote, rage. I just keep building it up, keep piling it on. I need it more. Depression is a real bitch and gets in the way of my motivation. Life fucking sucks. I know that. I'm aware. Too aware. It's 100% real now. It's sunk in and I'm ready. I'm ready to just stop thinking. To get on with it and move on. I hope I fucking scare you fuckers. God, the media is going to be so pathetic. Mountain View. Fuck that school. No good memories about that school or the staff within it. Shock and awe. That's what I'm going for. This cesspit town has been growing more and more violent over the last few years, but nothing like this. Not even close. I'm going to shake this place to its fucking core. Ben wrapped up his manifesto with the following, quote, you guys are all so shocked and appalled. I'm picturing it now. I've always been dangerous, though. Like a ticking fucking time bomb, ready to blow. About 2 weeks after the shooting, the Safeway reopened to the general public. Each shelf was neatly stocked, merchandise lined up in a uniform manner and sparkling clean. The pharmacy gleamed with a new coat of paint, and the entire store beckoned customers to come back in and shop. For added safety, the store instituted a security guard, fully equipped with a bulletproof vest, just outside of the store. We all have the unique ability to help prevent such a catastrophic event from happening. If we keep our eyes and ears open and never hesitate to report when something or someone just doesn't seem right. With a delicate balance of mental health reform, education, active shooter training, and common sense gun laws, we may one day realize the dream that there will be no more active shootings. We pray that love will prevail over hate.
Too many have died! We should say to ourselves, not one more!
In the meantime, we urge our listeners to stay aware of your surroundings and keep in touch with your loved ones. If you see something, say something. You never know how many lives you'll be saving. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A big thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the songs on our show. You can find him online at www.darrencurtismusic.com. Make sure to check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Active Shooter, the podcast, and on Twitter at Podcast Active. Thank you, and be safe.